The audience waited in silence, the air thick with anticipation. The massive studio glowed under bright stage lights, every seat in the auditorium filled with people eager to witness another one of Keanu Reeves's rare interviews. Colorful signs with words like, "Keanu, you're our hero," and "Thank you for being you," lit up the crowd, waving back and forth with excitement. Behind the cameras, producers whispered frantically, their hands signaling to camera operators as a silent countdown flashed across several monitors. The moment had come. And then, there he was. Keanu Reeves appeared from backstage, walking across the stage with calm, measured steps. He wasn't in a tailored designer suit or surrounded by an entourage. Number. He wore a simple black shirt, a modest blazer, and well-worn jeans. His dark hair fell gently past his shoulders, and a soft, humble smile tugged at the corners of his lips. The crowd erupted into applause. Some called out his name, while others simply watched in awe. There was something about his presence, uncomplicated, unbothered, and deeply grounding. Keanu raised a hand, offering a modest wave of thanks, before settling into the central chair placed right in the middle of the set. On the other side of the table sat Vanessa Cross. Known across the country for her sharp tongue and no-nonsense attitude, Vanessa had built her career on one thing: exposing the vulnerabilities of the world's most powerful people. Her show wasn't about inspiration, it was about confrontation. She didn't just interview celebrities, she broke them down. Dressed immaculately in a sleek black blazer, her blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, Vanessa stared at Keanu with a carefully rehearsed half-smile. Her manicured fingers tapped against a stack of question cards resting on the table. She studied him for a moment longer before leaning forward. "Keanu," she began, her tone sharp yet controlled, "you have fame, you have fortune. You could live like a king. Yet, you take the subway. You donate millions. You avoid luxury at every turn. Does that really change anything? Does it matter to the world?" The studio fell silent. Even the rustling of the camera crew stopped. The question wasn't subtle. It was a challenge, a direct attempt to provoke him. But Keanu didn't flinch. He sat back, hands resting calmly on his lap, and offered the faintest smile. "Vanessa," he said gently, his voice calm, almost soothing. "Have you ever thought about how many people feel invisible? Every single day?" The words hung in the air. Simple, powerful. A shift swept through the studio. Some audience members glanced at each other, caught off guard by the depth in such a simple response. Others lowered their eyes, reflecting. Vanessa blinked, surprised at how effortlessly he'd turned the question back on her. But she wasn't done. She flipped to the next card, a glint of ruthless determination flashing in her eyes. She leaned in, voice lower, colder. "Let's talk about loss, Keanu." The audience tensed. "You lost your fiancé, your unborn child, your best friend. Didn't that destroy you? Don't you ever wonder if, in the end, everything is just pain?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some covered their mouths. Others frowned, visibly disturbed by the brutal question. Keanu lowered his head, his fingers lacing together over his knees. The cameras zoomed in, capturing the shift in his eyes, a quiet ocean of grief buried deep within. A silence so heavy settled over the room that even breathing felt too loud. But then, he looked up. His voice, when it came, was steady, calm, almost peaceful. "Pain never destroyed me," he said softly. "It taught me that nothing is permanent, that every moment matters, and that true love never disappears." The studio froze. Some in the audience wiped away silent tears. A woman in the front row dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Even those who didn't know his story felt the truth in his words. For the first time, Vanessa looked unsettled. Her perfect posture wavered. That sharp smile faded, replaced by something almost human. But still, she wasn't ready to give up. She flipped to the next card, her jaw clenched. This time, she was going to strike harder and deeper. Vanessa took a steadying breath, forcing a smirk back onto her lips. She couldn't lose control. Not now. The audience was already hooked, leaning forward in their seats, hanging on to every word. But Vanessa wasn't here for some feel-good story. She was here for a takedown. She casually tossed the next question card onto the table, her voice dipping low, sharp as a blade. "Keanu, you're over 50 now. Hollywood doesn't care about actors your age anymore. You know that. Don't you fear becoming irrelevant?" The words sliced through the air. Some audience members gasped. Others exchanged uncomfortable glances. It was a cruel question, designed not just to challenge him, but to humiliate him. Keanu didn't respond immediately. Instead, he sat still, his fingers lightly rubbing together as he stared off into the distance. It was like watching a man briefly disappear into his own thoughts, somewhere far beyond the bright studio lights, and the uncomfortable silence pressing in around him. Vanessa watched with barely concealed excitement. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She leaned forward slightly, certain she finally had him cornered. But then, Keanu lifted his head, and he smiled. Not a smirk, not a rehearsed celebrity grin, but a genuine, soft smile, as if he'd just remembered something beautiful. "Vanessa," he began, his voice steady, almost gentle. "Have you ever seen a sunset?" The question stunned her. "What?" She blinked, caught completely off guard. "A sunset," Keanu repeated, his eyes now locked onto hers. "It's beautiful, isn't it? The colors, the peace, the way it signals the end of a day well lived. But have you ever heard anyone call a sunset irrelevant just because the night is coming?" The silence was deafening. And then the audience erupted. Applause thundered through the studio. Some stood, cheering, others simply wiped tears from their eyes. The words hit something raw, something real. For the first time since the interview began, Vanessa Cross was speechless. Her lips parted, but no words came out. The sharp smile slipped. What replaced it was something almost vulnerable. A flash of surprise, maybe even respect. Keanu didn't gloat. He didn't sit back and revel in his moment. Instead, he remained still, his eyes gentle, his presence grounding. Vanessa cleared her throat, glancing down at her cards. She needed to recover, to find a new angle, because in that moment, she realized something she hadn't expected. Keanu Reeves was not here to win a debate. He wasn't here to defend himself. He was simply here, unshaken, untouchable. But she still had one last card to play. If age didn't break him, maybe his childhood would. Vanessa straightened her shoulders, forcing the usual smirk back into place. She needed to strike now, before she lost the momentum completely. "Let's go back, Keanu," she began, her voice calm but cold. "You grew up without a father. Your mother, she worked multiple jobs just to keep you afloat. Tell me, have you ever felt angry about that? About him walking away?" The words echoed through the studio like a gunshot. The audience stiffened, some gasping quietly. It was cruel, deliberate, designed to rip open old wounds. Keanu sat silently for a moment, his eyes softened, his shoulders relaxed, and then he smiled, not out of amusement, but out of understanding. "My father," he began slowly, "he taught me something. something valuable. Vanessa's eyes narrowed in confusion. This wasn't the answer she expected. Keanu's gaze drifted, like he was staring into the past. He showed me the kind of man I never wanted to become. He paused, then looked directly at Vanessa. And my mother. She taught me how to survive. A gasp escaped from somewhere in the audience. A woman wiped her eyes again. Another man shook his head in disbelief, whispering, "That's powerful." Vanessa sat frozen. For the first time, she didn't know what to say. Her entire game, the traps, the cards, the cruelty, none of it was working. Keanu wasn't breaking. He wasn't flinching. He was teaching. And the entire room was listening. Still, Vanessa refused to give up. There was one last place to go. One last question that might, just might, shake him. And it was the darkest one yet. The tension in the studio was suffocating now. Vanessa Cross sat still, staring down at her remaining question cards. For the first time, she hesitated. Her carefully crafted arsenal of provocations reduced to nothing in the face of Keanu's calm. Every dig, every cruel twist, he'd turned them into something beautiful, something meaningful. But she had one last card, and it was the darkest one. Vanessa straightened her back, smoothed her blazer, and forced herself to look up. There was no more smile, no more facade. What came next wasn't entertainment. It was war. She leaned in, her voice lowering just enough to pull everyone in. "Keanu, we all know time waits for no one, not even for you." The words hung there, heavy, ominous. "Don't you ever feel fear?" she continued, her tone almost a whisper now, cold and deliberate. "Fear of what comes next, of what happens when your time runs out? Have you ever wondered, what if no one remembers you when you're gone?" The studio fell dead silent. No whispers, no shifting in seats. Even the cameras seemed to pause, the red lights flickering like they too were holding their breath. Keanu didn't move. For a long, agonizing moment, he just sat there, breathing, thinking. His hands rested calmly in his lap, his eyes lowered, lost in thought. It was the first time all night that Vanessa thought, maybe, just maybe, she'd found the crack in his armor. She watched him like a hawk, waiting for the stumble, the hesitation, the fear. But then, Keanu lifted his head, slowly, deliberately, and he smiled. It wasn't the charming grin of a movie star. It wasn't a mask. It was real. "Vanessa," he said, his voice steady, almost gentle, "do you know the difference between fear and faith?" She blinked. The question wasn't on her cards. It wasn't anywhere in her plan. "What?" she asked, her voice brittle. "Fear," Keanu continued, his gaze piercing straight through her, "makes us run. It makes us small. But faith lets us stand still and face the storm, even if we know we might not make it through." The words echoed like thunder in the silent studio. The audience sat, frozen, as if those words weren't meant just for Vanessa, but for everyone. Watching, listening, carrying their own storms. Keanu took a slow breath, his voice soft but unshakable. "I don't fear being forgotten, because the question was never what they'll remember about me. The question is, what will they remember about you?" The shift in the air was instant. A collective gasp swept through the studio. Some people covered their mouths. Others sat back, stunned, like they'd just witnessed something sacred. Vanessa's lips trembled. Her hands gripped the edges of her chair, knuckles white. She'd come prepared for a battle. She'd sharpened every question like a knife. And somehow, Keanu had turned them all into reflections. Her throat worked as she tried and failed to speak. The audience was no longer watching a takedown. They were witnessing a moment, one that would stay with them, long after the cameras stopped rolling. A single tear slipped down Vanessa's cheek. She didn't wipe it away. For the first time in her career, she had no words, no comeback, no retort, just silence. And Keanu watched her, not with victory in his eyes, not with triumph, but with understanding, with grace. And then, something even more unexpected happened. Keanu stood. The studio was so quiet you could hear the faint buzz of the overhead lights. Some audience members wiped their own tears, unable to look away. Vanessa sat frozen, staring up at him. Keanu didn't need to say another word. He'd already won, but not the way Vanessa had imagined. Not by outsmarting her, not by fighting back. He'd won by simply being himself. Keanu stood tall, his figure calm and unshaken in the harsh glow of the stage lights. He wasn't just a man now, he was a mirror, reflecting everything Vanessa tried to bury, everything she feared about herself. Vanessa Cross, the journalist known for breaking the strongest spirits, sat motionless. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. Her once sharp eyes, the same eyes that had pierced through politicians, actors, and moguls, now glistened with something unfamiliar: vulnerability. The cue cards she'd held onto so tightly, her weapons, slipped from her fingers, scattering like fallen leaves across the glossy table. No one moved to pick them up, because it was over. The entire studio seemed suspended in time. The audience, hundreds of people, sat frozen. Some clutching tissues, others staring wide-eyed, as if witnessing a moment they'd tell their children about one day. The cameras were still rolling, but no one cared about the angles anymore. They cared about what was happening, raw, real, human. Vanessa finally managed to speak. Her voice cracked, barely a whisper. Why? Why does it feel like I've been the one answering questions all along? Keanu smiled softly, a smile full of sorrow, wisdom, and understanding. Because maybe you have, he replied gently. Maybe we all do. Every time we try to tear someone else down, it's just our own reflection we're fighting. Vanessa's shoulders trembled. Years of armor, of pride, of control, of power, cracked in an instant. And in that moment, something remarkable happened. She let go. A single sob escaped her lips. Not theatrical, not staged. Real. I built this career, Vanessa choked out, thinking, if I exposed everyone else's weakness, maybe I wouldn't have to face my own. Keanu nodded, not judging, not gloating. Truth is, we're all scared, he said quietly. But it's not the fear of death or of being forgotten that breaks us. It's the fear of never having mattered at all. That was it. The audience gasped softly, some openly crying now. Vanessa wiped at her face, her hands trembling. How do you live with that fear? Keanu took a deep breath and gave her the only answer that mattered. You stop running from it. You face it every damn day. And somewhere along the way, you realize that making someone else feel seen is the only thing that truly lasts. The words weren't poetic. They weren't rehearsed. They were real. And for the first time in Vanessa's life, she understood. She nodded slowly, her gaze no longer sharp, but soft, vulnerable. Thank you, she whispered. Keanu smiled faintly. No need to thank me, just pass it on. The silence that followed wasn't awkward or heavy. It was sacred. And in that moment, everyone in that studio knew They had witnessed something bigger than an interview. They had witnessed a reckoning. The studio remained completely silent, as if even the walls were holding their breath. Vanessa sat there, her eyes red, her voice barely a whisper. The once feared journalist, the woman known for tearing down the most powerful, now stripped of every layer of defense. Keanu didn't gloat. He didn't rise in triumph. Instead, he just watched her, with the same calm, understanding gaze he had carried from the moment he walked onto that stage. And then, Vanessa did something no one expected. She stood, with shaky hands. She turned toward the audience, her voice trembling but raw. "You came here tonight, expecting me to break him, to find the cracks, the weak spots, and expose them." She paused, swallowing hard. But what I found instead was my own. The crowd gasped. No one had ever seen Vanessa Cross admit defeat. Not like this. She continued, her words heavier with every breath. "All these years, I've asked the questions, the tough ones, the cruel ones, and I thought that made me strong." She glanced at Keanu, her voice cracking. "But strength, real strength, is being able to sit here and own up to the fact that maybe I was the one hiding." A hush fell over the room. Some audience members cried openly now. Others simply stared, unable to process what they were witnessing. Keanu finally stood, his figure tall, but his expression soft, and what he said next would stay with everyone in that room, forever. "You asked me, what happens if no one remembers me when I'm gone?" Keanu began, his voice steady. He looked around, meeting every pair of eyes in that audience. "But the truth is, I'm not afraid of being forgotten. I'm afraid of forgetting what really matters." He turned to Vanessa. "And tonight, you reminded me of that." Vanessa's lips trembled as a single tear slid down her cheek. Keanu reached out, offering his hand. No words, just an invitation. Vanessa took it, and in that simple act, everything changed. The audience stood, thunderous applause erupting, not because a celebrity had won, but because humanity had. In that moment, titles, fame, power, none of it mattered. What mattered was what they all felt, raw, unfiltered, real. Vanessa wiped her face, laughing through her tears. "For the first time, I don't care about the ratings," she whispered. Keanu smiled. "That's when you know. You've truly lived the moment." The screen slowly faded to black, but the story lingered, heavy in every heart. And then, one final message appeared. In the end, it's not about the spotlight, the fame, or the legacy we leave behind. It's about the lives we touch, the hearts we open, and the moments we choose kindness over everything else. The music swelled, soft, emotional, unforgettable. And as the video came to an end, one thing was certain: no one would ever forget what happened that night.